What's up and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today I'm going to be showing you the making of a couple of beats that I've made on the Polyend Tracker that go out of their way to take advantage of its sound design capabilities. I'm still not totally sure how I feel about the device itself, but having put these together, I've definitely warmed up to it a bit. All that being said, let's jump into it. Alright, so the beat that you heard in the intro is the processed version of what I'm about to play for you. I exported all the individual tracks, super easy to do, brought those into Reaper and did some mixing to really clean them up a bit, get some more punch out of that mix. So here's what it sounds like just on the tracker itself. Now I can get into the individual elements. So I'm going to mute all this stuff for now. A solid basis for a Psy type beat. So I've put the kick and the rolling bass on the same track, and I've gone out of my way to kind of tune them to hit at basically the same pitch. You see all this other stuff going on here, that's all the other tracks. Ultimately, I could have just put them on separate tracks and then heavily side-changed the bass to the kick, but in this case, I wanted to just really lean into the vibe of working with the tracker. Up next. This is kind of the main star of the track and the thing that really takes advantage of the sound engine. And I should mention, this first beat is going to be all about granular stuff. The second beat is going to be all about wavetable stuff. So that's kind of the format I'm going for. I wanted to take some time to intentionally go out of my way to use both engines to kind of construct a track. So there are a few things going on in this instrument. First of all, if I go into my sample playback, you can see granular is selected. These are my settings for that. And you can see how it's hopping all around the waveform. That is because if I go into instrument parameters, cycle through that, and I go to granular position, that is modulated by an LFO. The LFO is set to random, and that's every one step. So if I just hold down a note, you can hear it cycling through different spots in a kind of a stepped manner. And then that little pew-pew is from modulating the filter cutoff, which is set to a low pass with the resonance absolutely cranked. So let me bring the cutoff up, bring it back down. And then I'm playing a pattern that's constantly retriggering this, so it's constantly both randomizing the granular position and triggering the filter, so I get the kind of constant pew-pews. And I've got my overdrive up a little bit as well. That's a really fun element that really takes advantage of how this thing is set up. It's very steppy, very chaotic, and that was the goal. Up next, I've got a couple of simple percussion elements. I've loaded all this stuff up onto just 2 tracks because I can. Kept that fairly bare bones. And then I believe I programmed this in like one step at a time. So I was able to kind of think through what I wanted the ARP to sound like. And then I've not done a whole lot to that original sample. Didn't really need a whole lot. So it's just this fairly dry little element. The one thing I did mess with is, once again, the low pass filter or high cut filter. A little shorter, a little stabbier, works a little better for the kind of punchy vibe I'm going for. And then this is kind of a mess of an element. Not my proudest sound design work, but this is another case of a granular element with an LFO controlling the position. This time much less steppy, it's actually scrolling back and forth. So let me show you that. Triangle wave. Just a little bit. It sounds kind of messy. I will readily admit that. But what it does give me is this scratchy sound that I can, in post, just push way into the background to give me some atmosphere. And a bit of grit in my atmosphere as well. So there was some thinking ahead there, although on its own it doesn't sound all that pretty. These other two tracks are blank. Like I said, I didn't really need to go so crazy stacking a bunch of stuff onto just a few tracks. But hey, I'd rather just conserve tracks as I go. And then if I don't need these tracks, well, that's fine. No harm done. So let me unmute elements one by one. And it sounds a little bit like a mess, which is why I went and did quite a bit of EQ, added some reverb to some elements, and if I recall correctly, quite a bit of sidechain in post to really clean all this stuff up and have it feel as punchy and in your face as possible. But you've already heard that in the intro, so let's just move on to the second beat. This one is a little bit simpler, but once again, it just exists to allow me to explore the synth engines in a little bit more depth than I did in my previous tracker video. So, a lot of very typical kind of tracker-style drum programming going on here. Something like that. Let me show you the tracks as they actually are. So, just a fairly gritty kick and a little cross-stick element. And I can sidechain everything to these elements if I wanted to. Simple little hi-hat part. These are my little fill elements. Just filling in those little gaps in the beat. You'll notice that's only one note of the synth pad because I used the trick that this thing has built in where if you play multiple notes polyphonically, it'll spread those out across tracks. These three tracks in this case. It's a little bit finicky with how it re-triggers stuff, but that's okay. So this element doesn't quite get away from the whole scratchy sounding pad thing that I've got going on. But I'm honestly totally fine with the fact that it sounds a little more digital. Sometimes that can sound really nice. So if I go into sample playback, you can see the wavetable engine is selected. These are my settings. This is a custom sample from my $5 sample pack, as are quite a few of the samples in both of these beats. So if I go into instrument parameters, and as you can see here, the wavetable position is being modulated by a triangle LFO. And that's where a lot of that movement comes from. And then the rest of the movement comes from, once again, our old pal, the high cut filter, with a little bit of resonance. Let me just turn that up. So that's what's making it behave a little more like a pad, as it kind of takes its time to go in here. I've got center the reverb and delay a little bit, and that is basically it for that sound. And in post, I would probably add a whole lot more reverb and then sidechain it a bit to the kick and cross stick. And finally, let's talk about the bass. As you can hear, the filter is doing quite a bit of work here. So if I hop into instrument parameters, you've got the resonance turned up a good bit, the cutoff turned down a good bit, and as you'd probably expect, this is being modulated by an envelope. The wavetable position, however, is not being modulated this time around. So if I go into sample playback, that just sits there parked on one position. So in this case, I'm using the wavetable as basically the source of a single cycle waveform that I can then shape with the filter, as I please. No overdrive or anything, although that probably would sound kind of nice. That sounds way cooler. I should have done that. And then I've just tuned it way down because I've noticed sometimes that bringing in a wave file and kind of converting it to a wavetable will make it super high-pitched and tinny, and kind of, it sounds like a migraine, if a migraine could sound like anything. So I've pitched it way down. It ends up being a nice little gritty bass, especially enhanced by the filter doing its thing. If you'd like to see my first impressions of the Polyend Tracker, you can click or tap up over here, and if you'd like to see some sound design sessions, you can click or tap down over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.